Picture this. It's a cold Tuesday morning in Berlin, November 1923. You're standing behind a man in a bakery line who has just traded a literal wheelbarrow full of cash, millions of marks, for a single stale loaf of rye bread. But as he turns to leave, he doesn't look at the bread. He looks at his daughter standing by the door. And in that moment, you realize the most terrifying thing about hyperinflation. It isn't that the bread became expensive, it's that the human being became cheap. Your competitor will tell you that the price of bread hit 200 billion marks. They will show you charts of currency devaluation and central bank failures, but they are performing an autopsy on a currency. Today, we are performing an autopsy on human morality. In 1923 Germany, the math didn't just break the banks, it broke the social contract. When money loses its value, the rules of being a good person evaporate. We've been taught that gold is the ultimate hedge against collapse. History tells a darker story. In the Weimar Republic, a diamond ring could buy you a week of food, but a connection with the local farmer's son could buy you a lifetime of survival. This isn't just a history lesson, this is a forensic warning. When the numbers on your screen, the ones you call savings, eventually lose their grip on reality, your gold won't be your most valuable asset. Your reputation will be, your family will be, or, if you're not careful, they will be the first things you sell to stay alive. Today, we aren't looking at how much the mark fell. We are looking at how far the human soul dropped with it. Because if you don't understand the pattern of how neighbors turned into predators for a piece of butter, you are destined to be the prey in the next collapse. To understand why human relations became so cheap in 1923, you have to understand the math of betrayal. Your competitor will tell you that the Reichsbank printed money to pay for the general strike in the Ruhr. That is a clinical fact. But the forensic reality is much darker. Printing money is a state-sponsored act of theft against the virtuous. Think about the Weimar middle class, the teachers, the doctors, the librarians. These were people who believed in the social contract. They worked hard, they saved, and they followed the rules. But hyperinflation is a predator that specifically hunts the rule followers. By June 1923, the math had turned into a monster. If you were a landlord who had worked for 30 years to buy an apartment building, the monthly rent you collected, fixed by old contracts, wouldn't even buy you a single postage stamp. The tenant was winning, and the owner was starving. This is where the betrayal starts. When the value of money vanishes, time itself loses meaning. In a normal economy, you work today to enjoy tomorrow. But in 1923, tomorrow was a threat. If you didn't spend your wages within 60 minutes of receiving them, you lost 20% of your life's work. This instant gratification trap forced people to stop thinking about the future and start thinking only about their stomachs. And here is the forensic pivot. When you stop caring about the future, you stop caring about your reputation. In the small towns of Germany, the honesty that had held communities together for centuries evaporated. Shopkeepers began hiding food from their regular customers, waiting for the price to double by evening. Neighbors who had shared sugar and salt for decades started spying on each other, looking for hoarded coal or hidden jewelry to report or to steal. The government didn't just devalue the mark, they devalued truth. If the state can lie about the value of its paper, why should a citizen tell the truth to his neighbor? The middle class wasn't just wiped out financially, they were stripped of their dignity. They realized that the social contract was a suicide pact for those who stayed honest. This is the pattern nobody talks about. When the currency dies, the first casualty isn't your bank account, it's the trust you have in the person living next door. While your competitor focuses on the price of gold coins, they ignore the most expensive loss of 1923, the cost of a conscience. When a currency dies, it takes the social fabric with it. In the forensic archives of the Weimar Republic, we find stories that are more terrifying than any bank run. There are records of lifelong friends who stopped speaking because one had managed to hoard a sack of coal while the other's children froze. The coal didn't just warm a house, it became a wall between human hearts. The Rishtey Saste, or cheap relationships phenomenon, manifest in three chilling ways. First, the betrayal of the elderly. In a normal society, we honor those who built the world before us. But in 1923, the elderly, who lived on fixed pensions, became a burden. Their life savings, meant to provide dignity in their final years, couldn't buy a cup of tea. Families were forced into a demonic calculation. Do we feed the grandfather who has already lived his life, or the infant who might survive the winter? History shows that in thousands of German homes, the elderly were simply neglected unto death because the math of survival demanded it. Second, the rise of the predatory neighbor. In Berlin's middle-class neighborhoods, a new profession emerged, the denunciator. If you had a hidden stash of food or a piece of silver, your neighbor wouldn't ask to borrow it. They would report you to the authorities or a local gang in exchange for a finder's fee of bread. The person who watched your kids yesterday became the person who sold you out today for 500 grams of butter. Third, the commodification of innocence. This is the darkest chapter. As the mark hit the trillions, the streets of Berlin and Munich saw a surge in child bartering. No, they weren't always sold for cash. They were rented for labor, or worse, sent to live with distant wealthy strangers in exchange for a monthly shipment of flour to the parents. Parental love, the strongest bond in nature, was outbid by the stomach. Your competitor will tell you to buy silver to protect your wealth, but history warns us, if your neighbor is starving while you are eating, your silver is just a target on your back. In 1923, those who survived with their souls intact weren't the ones with the most gold. They were the ones who had built trust networks before the collapse. They realized that in a world where money is worthless, a favor is the only true currency. But most people waited too long to realize this. They held on to their paper marks until they were trash, and by then they had already sold their friends, their dignity, and their humanity just to see tomorrow. Your competitor tells you to buy gold or hedge with silver. And while physical metal has its place, the forensic data from 1923 reveals a truth that sounds like heresy to a financier. In a total collapse, your utility is more liquid than your assets. Think about it. If you have a gold coin, but your neighbor has a gun and a starving child, that gold coin isn't an asset, it's a liability. It makes you a target. But if you are the man who knows how to fix the neighborhood's only water pump, or the woman who can preserve vegetables without electricity, you are a social necessity. You are protected by the community because your death would be their loss. In the Weimar Republic, a new underground logic emerged. It wasn't about who had the most marks, it was about who had the most social capital. Survivors operated on a system of barter credits. A doctor might treat a farmer's son for free, not out of charity, but for a barter debt. 3 months later, when the city was starving, that farmer would bypass the bread lines and deliver a crate of eggs directly to the doctor's back door. This wasn't money. This was a moral hedge. The independent financial historian talks about the Amish hedge, relying on self-sufficiency. But we must take it further. The ultimate Weimar survival strategy was skill density. Forensic records show that people with low-tech skills, blacksmiths, cobblers, seamstresses, and urban gardeners actually increased their caloric intake during the peak of inflation. Why? Because while a factory worker's salary evaporated before lunch, a cobbler could demand payment in kind. 1 pair of boots fixed equals 2 liters of milk. The price of milk didn't matter to the cobbler. The ratio of labor to food remained constant. This is the survivor's logic you need to adopt today. Ask yourself, if the internet goes dark and your bank account becomes a ghost, what can you do that someone else will give you their last loaf of bread for? If your answer is, I manage spreadsheets or I trade crypto, you are in a high-risk category. You have digital value, but in a 1923-style collapse, you need biological value. Survival in a broken world isn't a solo sport. It's a team game where the currency is trust and the dividends are paid in calories. The people who made it through 1923 without losing their souls were those who invested in their neighbor's survival as much as their own. Because when the state stops being your protector, your community becomes your only insurance policy. We look at 1923 Germany and think that was a different world. We have technology, we have central banks, we have digital safety nets. But forensics doesn't care about your technology. It cares about the pattern. The pattern is always the same. First, the government spends what it doesn't have. Second, it prints what it can't back. Third, the math breaks. And finally, the most dangerous stage, the social contract dissolves. In 1923, it took a wheelbarrow of paper to break a man's soul. Today, it only takes a few keystrokes from a central bank to devalue the digital numbers in your life savings. We are living in a high-speed Weimar. When the collapse happens this time, it won't be slow. It will be an overnight glitch, a banking holiday that never ends, a screen that says balance 0. Your competitor will tell you to position yourself in gold. I am telling you to position yourself in humanity. If you want to survive what's coming, you need to hedge against the cheapness of relationships. Don't just stack silver, stack reliability. Be the person your community cannot afford to lose. Build your Amish hedge, not just by owning land, but by owning the skills that make that land produce. In the ruins of the Weimar Republic, they found a saying, "Trust is the only coin that doesn't melt in a fire." History has given us the autopsy report. The cause of death for every great civilization wasn't just a currency collapse. It was the moment people decided that a piece of bread was worth more than their neighbor's life. The question isn't whether the dollar, the euro, or the pound will follow the mark into the grave. The question is, when the rules of money disappear, who will you be? Will you be the one with a bag of gold and no friends, or the one with a set of skills and a community that has your back? Choose your currency wisely, because in the end, you can't eat gold, and you certainly can't trust a man who only loves it. If this forensic breakdown changed the way you look at your savings, hit subscribe. We are digging deeper into the patterns the historians are too afraid to mention. Tell me in the comments, what is the one skill you have that will be worth more than gold when the ATMs go dark? Stay alert, stay useful, stay human.